Hello everyone, and thank you very much, 17,558 subscribers. This is an absolute beginner's car maintenance video about 4 critical checks that you yourself can do in a vehicle's engine compartment. This is for absolute beginners because there are absolutely no tools needed or necessary. No tools whatsoever. None. Just empty hands. The 4 critical checks will be done on 4 critical fluids of the vehicle, namely engine oil, engine coolant, transaxle fluid, and brake fluid. Out of the 4 critical fluids, 3 are needed for going, and the 4th one is needed for stopping. These 4 fluids are critical because, and not only important but critical, is because a total loss of any of these fluids will not only leave you stranded on the roadside and be of major inconvenience to you, but is also expensive to repair. So, a total loss of engine oil will destroy the engine in a matter of minutes. A total loss of engine coolant will destroy the engine in a matter of minutes. A total loss of transaxle fluid is also going to destroy the gears in the transmission in a matter of minutes or so, and is expensive to repair. And a total loss of brake fluids while the vehicle is running, once you're in an accident, is expensive to repair. Other fluids and other systems on the vehicle are only important because the total loss of those doesn't end in further resultant damage that's expensive to repair. If you lose all power steering fluid, it doesn't destroy steering. Steering will still be possible. If you run out of gasoline, another fluid, or diesel, whatever you use, it will leave you stranded. It will be of a major inconvenience to you, but it doesn't destroy the vehicle. Fill in some gasoline, you're good to go. With diesel, it's a little bit of more work, but it doesn't destroy the engine, or it doesn't destroy anything. It will cost money, but not in terms of expensive repair. Okay, and of course you need a battery, you need seats, you need a steering wheel, but those are important parts. But these 4 are absolutely critical for this reason. How this video is structured is that I'm going to go over what you do need besides not needing tools, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of safety, how this is all set up, and then we go over in a system a little bit of technical stuff. What if your level is low? What if your level is high? We're going to check the level and discuss about the level, the type of fluid that needs to go into your vehicle, and its quantity. We'll also inspect its color and smell. So it's a little bit comprehensive. It's going to take a little bit of your time, but will save you potentially thousands of dollars in terms of damage, permanent damage or expensive damage. And some of the checks that you can do not have a check engine light necessarily, or any kind of indication on the dashboard, or by the time the check engine light or the dashboard indicator shows up, it's way too late in terms of causing permanent damage. So an ounce of prevention versus a little bit of cure is exactly what we're looking at. So I said no tools are needed. What you do need is what I'm wearing, a pair of latex gloves or medical gloves or first aid gloves, whatever you're not allergic to. The reason for it is very simple. Unless you really like scrubbing your hands, cleaning it for hours, just put some of these disposable gloves on. A second item you need, and this is the end of the list, is a rag, a sacrificial rag that can be soiled or contaminated with small amounts of these fluids as they are being inspected. The reason why I don't recommend using a paper towel is that the paper towel is torn off in small chunks from a roll. The small chunks eventually end up in the compost or end up in the landfill with the garbage. I really don't like contaminating the landfill or contaminating the compost with engine oil or these fluids, so that's why I recommend that you use a rag. This rag can be used until it's saturated and be recycled the same way as your government's provisions stipulate how it is recycled, usually with the same way as used engine oil containers and used oil filters are recycled. You can just give it to your local mechanic and ask nicely that it be recycled. So let's get started with safety. So this is all you need for supplies: gloves and a rag. In terms of safety, make sure the vehicle is parked on a firm and level ground, and very important, it's level, because we're inspecting levels of fluids, and fluid level is sensitive to the vehicle being level or out of level, left to right as well as front to back, so make sure the vehicle is level both ways. In gear with the handbrake or parking brake engaged ideally, so you can work safely. Secondly, besides level or side level, is make sure the engine is cold to the touch. Maybe not negative 40 degrees cold, but cold to the touch, so you don't get burned and scalded with hot pipes or hot metal surfaces. Okay, so that's basically it for safety. Let's get going with the first fluid, engine oil. The engine oil is usually checked with a dipstick that is somewhere in one of the corners of the vehicle, typically on top of the vehicle, maybe a little bit further down depending on your make or model, and may require a little bit of reach and potentially touching hot surfaces. So that's why wait potentially hours after the engine stops to cool it down. Engine oil's dipstick is usually marked engine or color coded with a color that's different from the surrounding plastic and the surrounding metal. In this case, this is white and this is silver, so they are not too different. Sometimes it's orange or yellow or blue or some vastly different color from the surrounding metal or plastics. On some vehicles, on some makes, for example on some BMWs, I'm aware that a dipstick is not available for you to check the engine oil's level. However, the principle still applies. You can check the engine oil's level digitally on the inside, on your dashboard, on the instrument panel. There's either a needle or some kind of indication of the level. I'm not arguing how practical that is or how impractical that is, and I really don't know how to check the engine oil level on your Lamborghini. But the principle is the same. You must have engine oil in the engine. The engine oil lubricates it, and without lubrication it's going to be destroyed in a matter of minutes. So to check it with a dipstick, if you have one and you find one, this is how it goes. The dipstick is this flexible metal band or metal thing, and in normal operation, in the pipe in which it's housed, it usually gets splashed when the engine is churning up the pool of oil or puddle of oil underneath the crankcase in the engine's sump. So it's splashed with a film of oil everywhere. As the flexible band or strip of metal is being flexed, those particles can fly around and contaminate the engine elsewhere, can sit down on hot surfaces and burn and smoke later. I really don't want that, so this needs to be wiped off as it's being pulled out. So I have a rag here which I hold at the end of this pipe here, which houses this dipstick, and the whole thing is wiped down as it's being pulled out. It needs a little bit of turning or wiggling probably, because usually this takes a slight bend somehow, not this much, just a slight bend somehow as it goes back to the same pipe, and its end of the dipstick is in the sump. So at this point, take a look at the end of the stick and take a look at the markings. Some of them are marked with lines etched into the dipstick. Some of them have the words max or min on them. This one doesn't have, but does have high mark and low mark, obviously. Now with the holes, it's a little bit ambiguous whether the low mark is the top of the lower hole, the center of the lower hole, or the lowest point of the lower hole. But that's really like splitting hair. A low mark is a low mark, and if you're low on engine oil, you're gonna have some filled in. So let's take a reading on this engine oil level here. Make sure the dipstick is fully inserted, and then take it out again. This time it's not going to fling off any more droplets because it's been wiped off, but at the end it does have one drop of oil that can fly away. Hold it vertically down, not vertically up, that's going to skew your measurements. Sideways is also somewhat okay. So let's take a look at to what height does the oil puddling underneath the engine wet this dipstick. You can see that the oil level, other than some being here along the edge, which gets rubbed on as the dipstick is placed into its pipe, you can see that the oil wets this dipstick to the low mark. Same on the other side. I'm trying not to wipe it off with my glove or with my rag. This one has a low oil level, no matter how you look at it. Now, this low oil quantity is not going to damage the engine just yet within minutes or disintegrate the engine, but low oil level means that it's not being lubricated the amount or to the condition it should be lubricated. If the engine is not being lubricated, extra friction inside the engine causes extra wear, which will shorten its life, which will be resulting in an unnecessary expensive repair, a complete replacement of the engine way before its actual designated lifetime. So you can, with low engine oil, you can wear out an engine prematurely in a few years, as opposed to lasting 2 decades or 4 decades. So that's what applies to having a low engine oil reading. You may or may not get at this point a check engine light. Whatever triggers the check engine light, the sensor for it may be lower in the sump, so the check engine light may not be triggered at this point. However, it is a low level, and you either need to fill in some or you need to replace the whole engine oil level if it's dirty, and or talk to your local mechanic and just notify the person, hey, I have a low engine oil level, please deal with it. Also works. It needs to be dealt with. Besides the level, let's take a look at the color of it again. This is a dirty, very, very dirty engine color, engine oil color. It's got these blackish particles embedded in it. Clean engine oil has a clear yellow, like honey yellow or cooking oil yellow, fresh cooking oil yellow color. This one has dirty cooking oil color, or the dirt in it are actual dirt particles embedded in it. This needs to be replaced, the whole quantity of engine oil, with a filter. So if you don't know how to do it, just let your mechanic know, I need an oil change. It's also slightly low. So like I said, if it's a little bit low, it's not going to disintegrate your engine in minutes, but it needs attention. If your engine oil level is high, for example, it is possible, theoretically, just as we had theoretical zero engine oil, we can have engine oil level all the way up to this height. This is the oil filler cap, all the way up here. Now what happens if it's overfilled by this much amount is the excess will be just squeezed out, will drop on the ground and will contaminate the ground wherever you drive, but is not going to damage or blow up the engine. So too much engine oil, I'm not saying take some out, but too much engine oil is nowhere near as catastrophic or detrimental as low engine oil. That's all I'm saying. So that's the quantity of it and the color of it. The smell of it, I am aware that you can't smell anything on a camera, but you do have a smell of it. It's unlikely that it's going to smell like chocolate cake. It shouldn't smell anything other than fresh engine oil, or in this case used engine oil. It shouldn't smell burnt in any sense. Okay, so that's its smell. Now, the type of engine oil that you need for either topping up or replacing the whole quantity is specified in your user's manual. If you don't have it, or you don't know what type you need, just Ask your mechanic. Your mechanic will look it up and will know. Whether a vehicle is being operated in Alaska or operated in the Sahara Desert, it does matter what type of engine oil goes into it. What works in Alaska doesn't necessarily work or is necessary or needed in the Sahara. So your type of engine oil is depending on the climate your vehicle is being operated in. The quantity of it is also coming out of the user's manual, where it's specified how many quarts or how many liters of oil you have in it. It needs to be looked up. You can look it up yourself and do an oil change yourself. I have videos on that. It's straightforward, but it's somewhat technical. It's not for an absolute beginner. If you don't know how to do it, just take it to a mechanic who'll get it done for you. The top-up quantity, if you need some, once you have the right type of engine oil, you can top it up yourself. Just take off the oil filler cap here and just top up, I don't know, half a quart or half a liter, whatever. Some will be still better than not topping it up and running it with low engine oil or extremely low engine oil. So that's pretty much wraps it up for engine oil. Next one. Some of the themes will repeat here, so I'm not going to repeat necessarily everything, but the same principles by and large apply to the other fluids here. The radiator houses much of the engine coolant. This is the radiator here at the front, and the engine coolant is in it, as well as some engine coolant is inside the engine's cavities and passageways. Some engine coolant is in the hoses, higher up here and further down there. And some engine coolant must be in some of the smaller hoses and in an overflow reservoir. You can check the level of your engine coolant on the overflow reservoir. If you follow some of these hoses that are connected to the, there you can see it's continuing here, that are connected to the radiator, you will find the coolant overflow tank or this reservoir. The radiator has a cap, and it says never open when it's hot, don't open it when it's cold either. It's a little finicky to put it back on properly, and if it's not put back on properly, it's going to result in a loss of some or all of your engine coolant, which will destroy the engine in a matter of minutes. Just leave the radiator cap alone. It's very enticing to, hey, that's a shiny thing, just forget about it. Find the overflow tank. It's usually plastic like this. Often it's only friction fit like this. It's mounted on a bracket that comes out from that bracket like this, and is very straightforward. Has also a high mark and a low mark on it. In this case, this is the high mark, and the low mark is way down there. So I can see that the level in it is above the high mark. There is sometimes a dipstick inside as well, not just the marks on the outside of the container. So let's take a look at this one. Here is the F, the full mark, and at the end of it there's the low mark. Obviously you can see the amount of green engine coolant on it, that it's at least filled to the full mark, possibly above it. It's fine. The same principles apply. If you have a little more engine coolant in it, if this was filled all the way up to the top here, as in normal operation the engine coolant warms up, the excess would just be squeezed out underneath the cap and be lost, contaminating the ground or wherever you drive. So too much of it is not leading to a catastrophic engine failure. I'm just wiping off these little green droplets. However, not enough of it, or zero engine coolant, like I said, will lead to catastrophic engine failure in a matter of minutes, but that's with zero engine coolant. Low mark on the overflow reservoir doesn't mean you have zero engine coolant in the system, but if you have not enough in that, it's likely to have a little less than ideal in your engine coolant system, as a system, inside the engine, inside the hoses, inside the radiator, everywhere, wherever coolant is circulated. So if you have a low mark, just like with the engine oil, you need to fill some in immediately. Its color normally is green like this, could be red as well, depending on the blend that is being filled in. And it doesn't really have a particular smell. It's somewhat sweetish smell, but it's mostly water. Maybe not mostly, because this leads us to the topic of what type of engine coolant do you want to use for topping up. The type of engine coolant that's needed for your vehicle depends on the kind of type or climate you drive or use the vehicle in, just like with the engine oil. So the engine coolant appropriate to vehicles operated in Alaska is different from the engine coolant to be operated in the Sahara. You need to refer to your user's manual to find out what type of engine coolant is appropriate for your vehicle. Engine coolant is not antifreeze. Antifreeze can be a number of different chemicals. Most often it's ethylene glycol, but could be other chemicals, which is always diluted to maybe a 50-50 ratio or whatever ratio is appropriate for your climatic conditions. So refer to your user's manual what kind of engine coolant, what type of engine coolant, and as well as the quantity of it. The quantity in your user's manual will indicate the full amount circulating everywhere, but for topping up you just need some to top it up. Make sure it's the right type and just pour some in. Warm up the engine, let it run through, let it circulate, see if what you filled in is indeed enough or you need even more or even more. Most importantly, if you lose engine coolant, you might have a leak somewhere in the system, so you might be looking for leaks, or you might want to point it out to your mechanic. Hey, I have a low engine coolant, might want to check for leaks as well. The next thing to check is your transmission fluid or transaxle fluid, which has its own small dipstick. And it's a blue item further down here. It's visible from here, but it's visually small. I can't put the camera much closer than this, and you take out the dipstick much the same way, holding the rag at the base of the pipe in which this dipstick is housed, and pull it out and wipe it off in its entire length. Take a look at it. It has a low mark, it has a high mark, and it has the words cold and hot on it, referring to this. Like with the engine coolant, the quantity is going to be different whether it's a hot liquid or a cold liquid. Engine oil is also affected, but not much. It's really not worth the effort, but it's notable on the transaxle fluid. So the lowest mark, of course, is the absolute lowest point. The highest mark is the absolute highest point. Whatever you have in between, this could be the high mark for a cold engine, or the low mark for a hot engine could be this one in the middle. It's a little bit unclear on this one. However, what's absolutely clear is that you must have some transaxle fluid to lubricate the gears in the gear housing in the transmission there in normal operation. So you must have at least this much in it. Again, if you have too much of it, it's not going to explode or destroy or disintegrate your vehicle. If you have too much of it, excess might be squeezed out. It might be interfering with your shift patterns on the solenoids if you have automatic, or your clutch point or friction zone if you have manual. Shifts might be a little clunkier, but it's not going to disintegrate like low level of transaxle fluid will destroy your transmission in a matter of minutes or in a short amount of time. So you must have some. Checking the level is straightforward. Make sure it's fully inserted. Pull it out with not much wiggling because it's also drippy. Don't want to spread it too much anywhere, and it's immediately obvious that it's wetted all the way up to about this point, so it's way overfilled. What am I going to do about it? Precisely nothing. The vehicle is working fine as is. Its color is usually this cherry red, and the transmission case does not have a filler cap like the engine oil has a filler cap. Where the dipstick is, that's the filler cap, that's where it gets filled in. It doesn't need topping up, and don't think about taking some out, because a little extra is not detrimental, does not destroy the transmission. The correct type is sometimes printed on the dipstick like this. This needs genuine Mitsubishi ATF, that's automatic transaxle fluid, SP Roman numeral 3, and then the same in Japanese there, and same there in French. So that's the type of it, and its quantity. If you have low transaxle fluid, you need to let your mechanic know, or once you know the type of it, you can start topping it up and see if you fill in some, how much it brings up the level. Whatever you top up, you need to wait until the fluids trickle through the system and settle down on the bottom, and then after maybe some running of the engine, and then check again. So it's going to be a little bit of, maybe not cat and mouse, but it's a little bit of trial and error. However, there's not going to be much error. Whatever you fill in, the vehicle, the engine will be better off with it. The last item to check is over there, the brake reservoir. The brake reservoir usually gets dirty and needs to be wiped off and cleaned thoroughly before being able to see the high mark on the reservoir and the low mark. The color of the brake fluid should be fresh oil yellow. This is getting a little too oldish, as well as the color from the outside can be skewed from the aging color of the plastic. So sometimes the brake fluid has a dipstick on the lid, inside of the lid. Not this make and model. Let's see the color from here. Can't really see the color too well. It should be changed every 2 years or every 4 years, whatever is in your user's manual. Same with, of course, everything else. Fresh engine coolant should be put in every number of years, exactly as recommended. And for the transaxle fluid, it doesn't have a filler cap, an obvious one, because the manufacturer doesn't expect it to get contaminated with dirt like engine oil does, or be lost, unless there is an actual physical damage on the transaxle housing somewhere that leads to loss of transaxle fluid. And of course it needs to be examined by a mechanic or inspected what leads to the loss of transaxle fluid, because like I said, manufacturers don't expect it to be lost or replaced or changed, and it doesn't have a transaxle filter. So going back to the brake fluid, this looks old, this looks somewhat too darkish of a yellow. It could be flushed, but its level is okay and is safe. So in terms of its smell, it doesn't smell much, so don't try to smell it. None of this should be, especially the transaxle fluid, shouldn't be smelling burned. The brake fluid is not going to smell much anything, but it shouldn't be left open, because moisture from the air is going to be absorbed by the brake fluid, and there cannot be any water in the brake fluid. Atmospheric water, water vapor including. So those are the 4 critical checks. I know it's a long video, it's a little bit involved, a little bit technical, but there are no tools needed whatsoever. For none of these you may or may not get a check engine light, and if you check it yourself you can save possibly thousands of dollars in unnecessary repair, major amount of inconvenience, and major amount of messing with your schedule and life if you look after these 4 critical fluids yourself. Thank you very much for watching.